A warm welcome to everyone from everywhere that you're joining us from. Really excited for today's session. My name is Oluwatola. I'll be moderating our session today, our digital dialogue. And we'd really ask for the benefit of anyone who has a visual impairment or is blind, that all our speakers begin with a short description of themselves. So my name is Oluwatola. I'm a Black African woman. I'm wearing a turquoise cardigan and sitting in a bit of an untidy office, but it's a cozy office. Right, so today we are putting the spotlight on the role of partnerships in strengthening the impact of civic tech, which is a really important conversation and one I think that's close to many of our hearts. Civic tech is not technology as a product, but really should be viewed as a methodology, as a process, as a means of engaging different societal issues, societal problems. And so there's a value in collaboration and the collaborative nature of civic tech processes and outcomes. So in today's dialogue, we really hope to provide an overview of the role of partnerships within the civic tech ecosystem across different contexts. We also hope that the dialogue will reflect on case studies in which partnerships have helped to shape and develop the implementation of civic tech projects across communities and contexts. So our panelists, which we're really excited to introduce you to, will represent different role players within the civic tech field. We've got civic tech innovators, local government officials, community-based organizations, and the private sector within the mix, and hopefully in the audience as well. So our dialogue will focus on highlighting the wins of successful partnerships, as well as unpacking the challenges and risks associated with those partnerships and collaborations, which I think is a doubly important conversation. And so to help us do that, we've got a fantastic panel. I'd like to introduce you first, and she will do her brief intro. We will also put in the chat, if you'd like to hear more about our panelists, we'll put their bios in the chat. We've got Dr. Caroline Khene, who is a research fellow and digital cluster lead at the Institute of Development Studies. We also have Hector Dominguez, the Smart Cities Open Data and Privacy Coordinator at the City of Portland in Oregon. We've got Dr. Tobi Oluwatola, who's the Executive Director at the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. So really amazing speakers with really great insights to share. So without any further delay, really a warm welcome to everyone and a reminder to have a look in the chat for any additional instructions. I will now give the floor to our panelists, each of which will give a brief input, beginning with Dr. Khene. Caroline.
All right, hi everyone. Just for the benefit of those who may be blind or need just a self-description of who I am. Well, as Zuki said, I'm Caroline Khene. I'm a research fellow and digital cluster lead at the Institute of Development Studies in the UK. I'm a Black African woman with Black Afro hair and wearing glasses and a beige brown top. Behind me is a bookshelf. I'm in my study with several books, and I'm seated next to a fireplace. So I just thought I'd start off by just giving you a bit of a background of who I am, because the position I obviously bring to a civic tech project matters to explain some of my challenges and opportunities that I've experienced. So I'm an academic and researcher by background in the field of information systems. I have mainly specialized in digital development, which used to be known as ICT 4D, and now specialized specifically in civic tech. I have also directed 2 projects on civic tech, the first one being MobiSAM, which is our main project, stands for Mobile Social Accountability Monitoring, and it was implemented in Makanda, previously known as Grahamstown in South Africa. It mainly focused on providing access to a reporting platform for citizens to communicate to government around basic service delivery issues like water, sanitation, electricity, roads, and so on. After that project, we then were approached by an NGO called SAFAIDS to implement a similar project like MobiSam, but this particular project focused on providing a platform for adolescent youth to report on issues around access to sexual reproductive health services in local clinics. So having implemented these two different projects, we learned about the value of partnerships. We understand, as has been said in the summary, that when you're looking at the design and implementation of Civic Tech, it's not just about the product itself, but it's a relational process that involves a number of actors. Our typical actors are government, citizens, your NGOs, non-governmental organizations, civil society in general, your youth activists or your citizen activists, and your digital service providers, who can take the form of a university or even like a big tech organization or a social entrepreneurship. So having all these actors in place obviously presents a couple of challenges, because you're working with different knowledge systems and different specializations, and you will have certain actors dominate the process of Civic Tech. And as a result, you may end up with projects that are not really sustainable in the context because they do not fit particular knowledge systems or the way different communities and individuals work. Or you may have particular technologies that don't have specific policies or definitions around how data is managed, moderated, and who monitors or moderates that data when it comes to government and citizens engaging with each other. And so we have this challenge of power and trust. And we experienced this as we were trying to get to understand the field of citizen engagement in general, but the NGOs were also trying to understand where we were coming from, what technology can bring, what potential it presents, and how they could leverage off it the best way they could without being taken advantage of in the same case. So when you're looking at power and trust and trying to navigate that between the actors, it becomes very challenging because you have these particular ways of acting that other actors are not aware of. So your citizens are not aware of the decisions that are made by digital service providers, NGOs, or even civil society organizations. But at the same time, those particular key implementation actors do not appreciate and understand the local knowledge systems of your citizens. And so we ended up, because of having that kind of gap that existed, we ended up having questions around why the particular platform did not meet a particular need around how the youth interact or engage through forums, and why were specific elements around reporting on particular issues were a challenge. So I'm going to stop there, but one thing I want to obviously end up saying is that there are particular aspects that allow actors to actually interact or engage more effectively that need to be interrogated and researched on. And these relate to who are the representatives among these different actors in civic tech. What tasks can they exercise to allow more accessible engagement between the actors? What artifacts or objects can be used in this interaction? And finally, what are the standards and governance or regulation aspects that need to be considered when you're working with these different actors? I'll end it there. Thank you.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Thanks, Carol. Let's hand over straight to Hector.
Hi. So good day, everyone. My name is Hector Dominguez. I am in Portland, Oregon, in the American Pacific Northwest. I'm wearing currently a brown shirt. I am a Latino man. I go by he, him pronouns, wearing glasses, having a light beard, and with some grace in general, middle age. And the background is just a simple curtain. So currently I work for the city of Portland as in the Smart Cities program. I'm the Open Data and Privacy Coordinator. And I really appreciate the invitation for this conversation today. I think it is very important to have all these connections with each other, even though we may not agree when we develop or try to implement certain technologies. However, we need to be part of those conversations as the larger we. So as a context, well, I am actually originally from Mexico. So my native language is Spanish. Being here in Portland, I am an immigrant, not English speaker, relatively second language, and trying to adapt to new place, new land. So I have already 10 years living here in Portland. So that creates a context for me in how I connect with the work I'm doing. I'm originally an engineer. I'm coming from the Civic Tech community, the startup community. And this was actually, or is actually, my first job in government. So with that context, I jumped into trying to develop and implement open data right away, back in 2018.
Hector, sorry, I'm so sorry to disturb you. Would you mind having your video on? I've just realized that we can't see you.
Wow.
Thank you. I've been wondering if it was just me. Thank you.
So sorry. Well, that's good that I did the description for everyone. I appreciate that. So I was just saying, so I'm an immigrant here in Portland, Oregon, starting working with open data. And then, so right away, we understood that open data without privacy was a hard topic to do. Therefore, we started working on privacy as one of the very important partnerships there. So we started looking for privacy is a human right. Therefore, we started working with our Office of the Equity and Human Rights. And that has been one of the most important partnerships first. That's an internal relationship. It's a very close collaboration. And we have engaged in a number of policy developments throughout these years, starting from foundational policies, our privacy principles. And then when we finished our privacy principles back in 2019, early to 2020. So the city started looking into other cities in the United States that were banning face recognition for city government. Face recognition was back in 2019 being banned because of biases against people with dark skin color, particularly Black people. We started looking into that. And you can imagine banning a whole technology is a big step. Different stakeholders, shareholders, industry had big stakes in that conversation, while cities started banning all that. So we did our due diligence and basically started asking around. We started having connections and conversations with local organizations from obviously those most impacted. So Black organizations, immigrants and refugees, people who come, for instance, from the Middle East, families that are being displaced, families who have been impacted by police violence, for instance. In some cases, we had a very good response. In some others, we didn't. Some groups didn't want to talk to us. So with that, I just want to highlight that we started finding champions, not only among the community, but also among industry, among like different local businesses. We started having conversations. We created the spaces where people could come and talk to each other. So we put together on conferences, meaning that we just came to a space, decided what we were going to talk about there, and we talk with each other. It's the work on partnership is a constant collaboration, and I'm going to stop very soon. There is not much time, but all this effort, finding champions, finding people from the community who could actually invest their own time ended up in the city of Portland banning face recognition, not only for city use as other cities, but also face recognition which is privately owned in public spaces. So the city of Portland was the first city in the US and I think in the world who banned face recognition in public spaces when it's privately owned. And that couldn't happen without the collaboration and partnership with all these different people, different organizations back then. And I stop here and looking forward for the next conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Hector. Thanks for keeping to time. And handing over now to Tobi.
Thank you very much, Zuki, and the speakers that came before me. And just like the other speakers, I'll start with a self-description. My name is Tobi Oluwatola. I'm the Executive Director here at the Center for Journalism, Innovation and Development. We're headquartered in Abuja, Nigeria, with offices across Anglophone West Africa. So that would be Ghana, Gambia, Liberia, Sierra Leone. I'm wearing a blue suit, a blue tie, white shirt. I'm a good-looking African-American man, or no, Black African man, sitting in an office with a map of Nigeria in my background. So with the self-introduction done, first of all, I want to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to speak here. At the center, CJID, as we like to call it, what we do is leverage journalism, innovation, and open data to promote democratic accountability in the service of sustainable development. And our vision is a media ecosystem, but also that promotes democratic societies and that really takes Africa from the footnote of global history to a player in global affairs. So we're very big on development and progress in Africa. So a lot of the Civic Tech products that we promote and work on have to do with similar to what Caroline rather was describing earlier, have to do with how do we promote more accountability, how do we promote better transparency, and how do we promote democratic values in general. So at least I want to focus my conversation today on what are the benefits that we've found from the work that we're doing. And I'll give some examples of some of the products, Civic Tech products that we've been involved in, that we promote, but also what are the challenges and how do we think that what do we think the future of civic collaboration for civic technology looks like? So first of all, to speak on the benefits of civic tech collaboration. So first of all, we found that many times those of us who operate in the NGO space, so we see ourselves as an independent think tank that is largely donor funded. And we also support quite a few, we own and support quite a few media institutions, including Premium Times, which is one of the most widely read newspapers in Nigeria, as well as Dubawa, which is a fact-checking website. But what we find is that our business model isn't such that we have a lot of resources. As you all know, very deeply technical people tend to be expensive. So we find that it's hard to retain technical talent, especially as they get more experienced, to build a lot of the products that we have to build. So we almost don't have a choice but to collaborate in many cases. So right now we're collaborating with Google to build an AI-driven fact-checking service to fact-check audio radio messages. And we found that to be very helpful because whereas we couldn't marshal the resources and the technical talent to make that happen by ourselves, by collaborating and working with a wider network of organizations that are equally all trying to solve a problem, which is the big problem of disinformation in the information space across Africa and indeed globally. We find that we can play our own unique role in creating that whole that solves that unique problem that everyone faces. The second benefit that we find is that of skill and amplification, because and I'll give the example of a product that we have that is similar to Mobisam that Caroline described, which is called Udeme. And Udeme's job really is to help citizens, but in our case, in most cases, we find that people who use it are journalists to really track government projects that are supposed to deliver public services in various locales across Nigeria at this point, but now increasingly in the countries, other African countries we participate in. And we find that, and there are other civic tech companies in organizations in Nigeria, like Budget, like Code, that have built similar technologies. But what you find is that we all seem to be doing similar things, but because we're all doing it, we learn from each other. But not only do we learn from each other, we are able to cover a wider geography by virtue of each organization doing it and doing similar work in different places. And for the most part, a lot of us really started doing this with the foundation that Ushahidi provided, which again, if Ushahidi just stayed in East Africa, then we couldn't have the skill that of this social accountability work that is now being done in Africa. The third challenge I want to, the third reason why we live or die by collaboration is the challenge that corruption fights back. And this we've really found particularly exemplified in two products that we've built. One is the Press Attack Tracker, which basically exists to help track anytime press, people of the press, people of the media, but also citizens who are trying to do what we call citizen reporting are attacked by either powerful actors in government or in the private sector. And we try to track this and create some sense of accountability around it. And then there's another product that we built called the Leaks.ng. Again, we had to build this product, particularly Leaks.ng, in collaboration with a wide network of media organizations, because the thing that we've realized is that if you as one organization or one journalist go write a story that exposes corruption, or someone in an organization whistleblowers, and that story gets leaked, it's easy to track the source and then victimize that person or victimize that media organization. But when we all come together, about 20 of us in that coalition, to build this product and are equally all accountable for what comes out of this product, we all co-publish the results of the investigations that come out of these technologies together. It leads to a situation is like when you're a broomstick, it's easy to break, but when you're a broom, it's harder to break. So we find that there is safety in numbers when we collaborate in that way. Obviously, these come with challenges. There is the challenge of ownership and sustainability. So what we found with a lot of the civic tech products that are out there is that after the initial buzz and after the initial excitement of a product launch and the donor is happy, everybody's happy, 2 years down the line, when the donor fund that created the product is done, the question is the product still in use? And to what extent are we able to create sustainability vehicles that give both an incentive for people to continue to use this product and for marketing to continue for the product? The second challenge is the challenge of obviously visibility for the organizations that are involved, because visibility, especially in the civic tech space, in the development space, because many development agencies rely on donor funding to continue to exist, to continue to do the good work that they do, then there are challenges of visibility and challenges of intellectual property that come in when you have to collaborate to do civic tech. And I hope that I'm going to stop there, and I hope that as we get into some of these conversations, we can get to brainstorm some solutions to some of these challenges. But without a doubt, collaboration is critical.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Toby, and thanks to all three of our panelists for some really insightful inputs, and I think importantly, keeping to time to make sure that we can also have the engagement from the floor and have questions channeled through. So now we are going to give the chance to our panelists to have sort of a bit of an engagement interaction amongst themselves. I'm not sure if you've got questions between yourselves that you'd like to ask of one another. I would ask to please have that, if all our panelists could now have their videos on so everyone can see them at the same time. So if all three of you could please join me on the floor, thank you. Yeah, and just I suppose in the spirit of collaboration, but also in the spirit of kind of mutual question asking, interrogation, exploration. I'd be very keen to hear from any of you if you've got questions to one another around what's been shared and about your different contexts. And after that, we will open the floor for questions. I see there's questions in the chat, which we will channel through and really have an interactive session. So yeah, please jump in. Who would like to proceed with a question? Go for it, Toby. It was Toby's hand I saw first. So
I'd really like to ask Caroline that the question that I ended my session with, my short presentation with, which is the question of how do you deal with the question of sustainability, at least in the organizations that you, because you research on this subject, how do you deal with the question of sustainability of these civic tech products after the initial buzz? And how do you also deal with the challenge of different collaborators trying to get visibility, especially because everyone is accountable to different donors when we come together to the room to collaborate?
Okay, I'll start with the thanks, Toby, for the question. I'll start with the first one on sustainability. It's a very interesting question, and I actually say it will vary with context. Because looking at the MobiSam project, it was a university-based project. And so it relied on the academics and researchers continuing with it. But we partnered with other local members like civil society, like PSAM and what's it called now? Is it the Makanda Grahamstown Civil Society Organization? I've forgotten, it's been a while. As well as various champions within the town itself, to try and make sure that it kind of sustains. What happened and what kind of evolved later on is the focus on the platform kind of went away because we ran out of funding and we couldn't sustain it. But the project somehow evolved because all these relationships were built over time, and those connections and networks were there still. And so they kind of turned to WhatsApp and Facebook, and they still use our Facebook platform to report on issues. There's a WhatsApp group which I created ages ago. It's still being used. And so those connections and trust were built over time. And it creates a nice kind of environment for another initiative to come in with other technology although I'll probably be very kind of, particular about the process of how it would work best to make sure that we still have data justice and making sure people's rights are respected. So that was the MobiSam. And the MobiSAFAID's case, what really worked was we worked with an NGO called SAFAIDS that had built its own kind of networks within Southern Africa. And the focus was not on the technology. It was on the program that it was supporting. So we were just a small pillar of the bigger program. And because of that, the values that came out of the program, MobiSAFAIDS was seen as something that was useful to the organization. And again, I say it's not perfect, and there's still a lot of learning that can happen from it, but it's still continuing today. Then the question about actors, how you bring actors together to collaborate. I didn't quite get that question. You talk about collaboration and visibility among actors. Can you maybe just rephrase it a bit?
Okay, so let me rephrase it a little bit. So I think for most actors that get into civic tech, you have to fund your work with donor funding. And many times that donor funding can be restrictive. And the donors want certain visibility for the work that they are funding. So that then becomes a challenge such that whereas, and I'll give a very simple example. So whereas in Nigeria, we could all collaborate and build one civic social accountability platform that we then all collaboratively market to the whole country to make sure that people are using it. There is one Google, and it is effective in search because everyone knows Google and where to go. But when it comes to social accountability, because CJID has its own grant from MacArthur Foundation to build Udemy, Budget has its own grant from this foundation to build Tracker. You have a foundation to build MobiSam. The efforts are distributed, so we can't market together in a way that creates the scale that Google can marshal. And the question is, how do we deal with that?
I think for that case, it's the grant that's driving the project and not the people or the influential actors. And if the grant is driving the project, then it's less likely to be sustainable. Like what happened with MobiSam, it was funded by making our voices count, but it didn't drive its continuity because it kind of affected us more directly because we were citizens in the town and we wanted this thing to still work because we wanted water, we wanted fixed roads and all of that. But it was driven mainly, by other actors. Now, again, it's the power and the trust. Who drives the project? Who determines the sustainability? If you give more power to the donors and the funders, and this was with respect, but if you give more power to them, then obviously when the funding goes and it's never continuous always, then that's the end. So what SAFAIDS did is they even though they are still a funded initiative, they brought in government like Zambia and Eswatini, and they really were valuing the project and took it over in a sense to continue with the project. But that also brings in questions around monitoring of data, surveillance, and all of that. So the more actors that are involved in it, the better there's a balance of power and trust, then you have more influential decisions, more key decisions made by actors in a balanced sense rather than one particular key actor. I'm sorry, I'm an academic, so sometimes
that's a great answer. That's a great answer. That's a great answer.
Okay.
Academics go on forever. No. Kidding, Carol. Yeah, I don't know if Carol, do you have questions? Hector, do you have questions? I'm really keen to do that before we open up to the floor and questions from the floor.
I have a question for Hector, actually.
Yeah, go for it.
So I really enjoyed reading about the work that you've been doing in Portland and going forward with the surveillance policy, which I think a lot of different states could or countries could benefit from. But I wanted to ask, when you look at privacy and understanding the rights, it's often contextual. So what one values as private may not be what others value as private. How do you manage that balance in policy formulation or consultation that has diverse actors?
Right. Thank you, Caroline, for that question. Yes, that's one of the biggest challenges. Technology is contextual, and our approach, and we, I think we recognize the fact that we have many blind spots, right? So therefore, we need to start talking to each other. We really need to bring those voices who have not been heard yet, or they have been not really present into the conversation. So we are trying to create this, again, spaces where people can talk to each other, and particularly those groups that have been marginalized. We go there. We go to the places where they are to understand their context, to understand how they feel about privacy and surveillance. Just last week, for instance, we coordinated a couple of meetings around the development of our surveillance technologies inventory. We start from transparency. Our policy is based on transparency right now. And just to get input and comments on what kind of information our inventory, that surveillance technologies inventory should contain, right? So we had two events, the first two events of hopefully many, one with a group of Latino women on the east part, almost the border with the next city in Portland, in Spanish, in language. That's an advantage for me. And the other one was actually a group that was in collaboration and partnership with an organization that serve people who are experiencing homelessness, recovering from addictions, or recently incarcerated. Both groups share really insightful comments and conversations of how they feel when they see a traffic camera on the way to having a cooking class, in the case of this, the group of women, or people requiring to use body-worn cameras as a way to defend themselves of racial profiling or abuses in general. So, which was surprising to me, how people may think that surveillance technologies could be intrusive for them, but when they actually use the technology in that context, can be a defensive tool in their lives. So we just need to keep talking to each other, and our strategy has been trying to get all those comments on the record and make people more aware of what we're doing, and make people more aware of what's happening with all these different conversations.
It's very interesting. Thanks, Hector.
It's an ongoing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Do we have time for another question?
Yeah, I think it'd be great to hear if you've got a question for either of our panelists before we move right into our floor.
Sure,
Q&A.
yeah, very quickly. I know this is a great conversation and questions are hard, right?
Yeah.
My question for both of you, Caroline, Tobi, is about trust. What are your thoughts when there is low trust? Tobi mentioned that there is this power relationship. The reputation of government in general is not very good, and we have seen it. Like, there are so many different people that don't trust us, because of history. And so, what are your thoughts and recommendations on healing that trust and building towards better partnerships and collaborations?
I'll go first because I don't think anyone has the perfect answer to this question, because trust is just one of those things that you earn over time. And I remember something I read from Malcolm X's autobiography, and I think it's been repeated over time, that if you have a crooked stick and a straight stick, how do you know? How do you prove that the stick is crooked? Put the straight one next to it, and over time people will see the difference. And so there's really no two ways around building trust than transparency and accountability over time, and it builds over time. It doesn't happen overnight, and one just has to. So I think both, and it applies to both civil society organizations as it does to government, that you just have to continue to build trust with transparency and accountability over time. And that's what we just have to do the best we can.
Yeah, I agree with Toby about the time. It takes time, but within the time, there's certain actions you're doing. So, in when we did MobiSam in Grahamstown, there was a lot of people, civil society, citizens in government were just not trusting. They were just clashing with each other continuously. And so here we come with a platform. We're like, yeah, here it's a platform we can report. And government were like, well, we're not going to engage with you, and we're not going to respond to your request. And the others were like, well, why would we bother? You never listened to us in the first place. And so we had to start from scratch on a neutral ground ourselves, even though we were citizens. You have to have a mediator. That's for sure. And in the whole mediation process that say probably took 2 years, we had various workshops where we learned how people felt. We had to have separate workshops with actors to learn how they feel. We had to go to their spaces, if it's a government office, if it's a meeting, or if it's a new program they have, or even the civil society, to understand how do they work, and learn them. So we're starting to know their knowledge systems, their code of conduct, their practice, and see how they can meet in the middle to engage more effectively with each other. And we managed to do that in the end, because we had separate workshops, then we had a joint workshop, because now we understood from both sides why they were in the situation that they were in, and how we could work within the constraints to get some sort of engagement between the two of them. But yeah, having mediation, learning their knowledge systems and their codes of conduct, respecting that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, this is definitely a session that I wish I was a participant, not a moderator, because I have so many questions, and it's, yeah, amazing. So now, I'm sure our participants are very keen to have some of their questions answered. It'd be great to hear voices, but I know that we've been collating some of the questions. I will please ask that my colleagues, the team, just make sure that if I've missed any questions that were asked, that you raise them. So now we're really wanting to ensure that we address some of the questions from the group. I'm sorry, we've been collating them somewhere. I've now lost my place of where those are. Great. So we have, I think this is to the next session of our, really is just our questions from the floor. We have a question from Monique from the city of Johannesburg in South Africa. And she's the head of innovation partnerships. And she asks, or rather requests, can you discuss ways in which cities are leveraging partnerships with civil society to solve their biggest community problems? What is the institutional and governance arrangement utilized by other cities around the globe, I suppose, to formalize these arrangements? Yeah, this would be really, I'm keen to hear this. We can go in any order. Let's go with the fastest voice first.
Yeah, I can share one of the great examples here in Portland with if you are curious about that, the Portland Clean Energy Fund. It's actually a specific project that came up from the community. It went to the ballots, it went through election process, and it's basically taxing large companies like a really tiny amount of the profit, but it's generating millions of dollars for climate change. And basically all these funds are actually being used for more solar panels, more resiliency, local resiliency in communities. The way in which the funds are used, there is a council around that. So for us in the work that we are doing around privacy and surveillance technologies, that's a model that we are looking into. And if you're curious, please check out Portland Clean Energy Fund as a great way to leverage partnerships.
Portland Clean Energy Fund. Thanks for that, Hector.
So just to add to that, I think the Open Governance Initiative is also an example of which is we're really just saying that cities can be a little more transparent with their budgeting processes and their budgets versus expenditure processes, and let civil society dig into those numbers and share those data with the people, and the people can feel carried along.
Thanks, Toby. Caroline, anything? Yeah.
Just to understand the question, it's how cities are leveraging of partnerships with civil society.
Yeah,
Can you
to solve their biggest community problems. So I think, I mean, in your input, I think that you have answered some of these, some aspects of this question. And then the second aspect of the question was, what is the institutional and governance arrangements that used by cities around the globe to formalize these arrangements? Yeah. So, I mean, I think you actually spoke to this just before this question was raised.
Okay.
Respecting the codes of conduct within, the municipal space as you're working in the context of MobiSam. But if there's anything else you'd like to add to that.
I think, I mean, what I really like is that, enabling coalitions between civil society organizations, because it's quite difficult when, they are working quite in the individual sense, and having that, thematic focus and coalition, at least you're working with one particular group of civil society organizations that have a particular code of conduct and have similarities and agreements around a particular theme. It's really effective in engaging with those kind of coalitions.
Excellent, great. Then there's a question that's directly to you, Carol, which is, it's from Milton. And Milton says, considering the importance of an inclusive and rights-respecting environment for civic engagement, can you please share any considerations for building a collaborative ecosystem in civic tech that further enables partnerships and effectively engages government agencies, non-profit organizations, citizens, and other actors? So considerations for building a collaborative ecosystem.
So we touched on that a little bit earlier around, the time and engagement needed. But if I focus on, I'm currently working on structuring these. How do they look like? Because I was talking about each actor group has their own way of doing and their own influences on decisions and so on, which are not very much, which other actor groups like your citizens are not really aware of, and hence there's no transparency and accountability in the actual design and implementation of these projects. And so if they begin to kind of understand the way decisions are made around how technology is designed, the digital rights around and digital ethics around that, and that is very transparent across the different actor groups, then you start getting that kind of understanding and collaborative ecosystem. And in this case, you need to identify who are those champions in those actor groups that we representatives to make information and knowledge more accessible. What are the various tasks that they do or exercise to make it more transparent around how they do design, how they get consent around the use of people's data and so on. What are their standards and regulations that they're to be held accountable for, like in Europe is the GDPR. How are these organizations exercising that, and how do they let citizens know or become more aware of how they're exercising that, and so on and so forth. So so it will be representatives, tasks, and the various standards and regulations around each of those actor groups to hold them accountable and for them to be transparent. Then you start developing that collaborative ecosystem, because it's not about someone controlling the conditions of how this design implementation should occur, but it's more about learning how those different actors are actually making decisions so that the other actors can influence them as well. I hope I'm making sense.
Yeah, well, to me you are, absolutely. Thanks, Carol. So now it's just looking at our time. For our remaining questions that I will share, I'm actually just going to ask our panelists to take note of the questions as I list them, and then in the order, and then we'll just open up for you to answer them. But really, if you could as much as you can. I hate it, but if you could do an elevator pitch answer, or even briefer than an elevator pitch answer to each of these questions. So our next question is to Hector. So I'll just directly go to each question. Please take note, and then I'll open for you to answer. Elevator pitch as brief as you can. So to Hector from Carl, he says, in implementing your Portland project, what was important was, so in implementing your Portland project, was it important that Portland is a member of the city's Coalition for Digital Rights?
Yeah, it was actually, Portland is member of the Coalition of Cities for Digital Rights. The coalition has a set of digital rights based on human rights. And we relied on the coalition on sharing information, best practices. The cities that participate, and mostly European cities, I have to say, so they have their European context that we need to translate into our local context. But having this collaboration has been very useful throughout the years. Now it's evolving to a new phase of the coalition, which actually, if cities in other places are interested in joining, so looking into the Cities Coalition of Digital Rights, and yes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Hector. To Tobi, how best do you think young organizations can collaborate with existing big tech organizations, most especially in terms of capacity building? Elevator pitch, brief as you can. Tobi.
Okay. One, look out for calls for application. These companies usually come out with lots and lots of calls all year round. Two, reach out to me. We may be able to connect you to one of the existing programs that we're running.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tobi. We'll give this last one to Carol and have her finish us off. So how can principles of user-centered design, this is definitely a Caroline question, how can principles of user-centered design and inclusive safe access be effectively integrated with open data initiatives in civic tech? Ensuring, the question is long, ensuring that data-driven solutions are not only user-friendly, but also accessible and beneficial to diverse communities and individuals. And where does this fit into an earlier question about collaborative ecosystems? So I know Hector would love to answer this as well. I'm pretty sure Tobi might want to, but let's give it to Caroline, please.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, as I said, they are really amazing developers and designers of platforms in civic tech, and they really look fancy and everything and can do amazing things, but they don't respect the digital rights of digital ethics. And you know what? They haven't really spoken to the users. So, you know, it also is, who do they define as the user? Have they defined them properly? And how are they making it accessible? And so things like what Hector's doing, you know, going to particular groups and working with those excluded groups, typically which happens with these kind of technology projects, to develop new ways of design and avoid focusing on the typical business approach to design. Yeah. I hope I answered the question.
You did, and thank you. And I really, I always hate rushing inputs or responses, but really appreciate the sort of brevity that each of you have had. And just to encourage that if there are other questions in the chat that we've missed, it's not to ignore, it's just really because of our time constraints. So really just wanting to say, this has been an amazing session, and really grateful to our input from our panel. Each of you have really brought some richness into this conversation, and my sense as well is that you are likely to have an influx of questions and you know, sort of connections from the group. Certainly, I would love to interact further with each of you after this call. So thank you so much. And thank you as well to everyone who joined this call. Your questions and provocations have been fantastic. Thank you to our interpreters. Thank you to our sign language interpreters. And really, from my end, I would also say thanks to the CTIN and ICS for convening the digital dialogues. I think these have been really, really rich and impactful.